You bring your phone everywhere. Work, school, the movies. Now you can bring it to an Xfinity store for an easy way to switch to Xfinity Mobile, a new kind of network designed to save you money. You can get up to 5 lines of talk and text included with Xfinity Internet at no extra cost, so all you pay for is data. It's never been easier to switch to Xfinity Mobile and keep the phone you love. Click here to see how. Sorry, I gotta take this. Restrictions apply. Limited to select mobile phones. Requires activation of a new line of Xfinity Mobile. Up to 5 devices per account. New Xfinity Internet customers limited to up to 2 lines pending activation of Internet service.
Archangels, ghosts, and Bigfoot. Oh my. It's just another night for Supernatural Girls. Real stories, real answers to life's biggest supernatural mysteries.
You're listening to Inception Radio Network. Inception Radio Network. Voice of the fringe majority. Catch the latest UFO headline news. Headline news. With Carol. Morning, afternoon, and night. Get a fresh perspective. A fresh perspective. On the paranormal with Alan B. Smith. On Paranormal Now.
And I just kept going on and on about myself. I'm taking a leak in the driveway. He says, I know you like to talk to total stranger. The story's got nothing to do with the Bruins game. It's what happened with Grandma. I was wondering if those were sadomasochism straps or something. But I digress from what I don't know.
Get into the beautiful mind of Juan only on the Mac Maloney Military X-Files show on the Inception Radio Network.
Hello, folks. Heidi Hollis is rocking the airwaves every Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern right here on IRN. But if you want to learn more about Heidi, check out her amazing website at www.heidihollis.com. For IRN, this is MJ.
Archangels, ghosts, and Bigfoot. Oh my. It's just another night for Supernatural Girls. Real stories, real answers to life's biggest supernatural mysteries. And now for another exciting interview with paranormal experts from this world and others. Here's your host, paranormal researcher Patricia Baker, on the one, the only Supernatural Girls.
Welcome, everyone, to another exciting episode of Supernatural Girls Radio. I'm your host, Patricia Baker. I am here with my co-host all the way from Tucson, Patricia Kirkman. PK, how you doing tonight?
Absolutely fabulous. This beautiful weather that we're having. 90s during the day, cool at night. Finally, it's heaven.
That sounds good. And happy birthday, by the way.
Thank you.
You had another birthday yesterday, so happy birthday again.
Well, thank you. I get a double header this year. Woohoo!
Yippee. So we have a great show tonight. We're going to be bringing on Grant Cameron. He is a world-renowned UFO investigator with a great book. Did you love this book?
The book was fabulous. And in
Charlie
fact,
Red Star.
both of us are going to show it's a great book.
It is super. I loved it. It's terrific. And we're going to hear all about this huge UFO flap that captivated people in Manitoba. This was a big deal in Canada in 1975, I believe. But we're going to get all the details from Grant tonight. And so stay tuned, everybody, for this wonderful interview that's coming up. And in the meantime, we got to talk, you and I. Numbers.
Yes, we do.
What the heck is going on, PK?
Well, you know what? I hate to say this, but we're in a universal 2-month. We're in a universal 2-day. And we are basically in a universal 2-year. So it's all going into everything that deals with partnerships, relationships, but predominantly females. What's the top of the news these days? All these women that are coming forth saying, hey, look what this guy did to me. So there we are, the overly sensitive. They're coming to the top of the heap. They're not putting up with stuff anymore. So this goes back that when we went into the 2000s, we started to see more and more issues with women, by women, for women. And now, as you see online, everybody's going, me too, validating the fact that they've had issues. I wish some of the men would come forward that have had issues with the same type of situation, because it isn't just the women that have had
You're right.
issues
It's
with
not
this.
just women. It is men. And, we've heard a number of times from people in Hollywood like Corey Feldman. And Corey has alluded to this problem with the pedophile culture in Hollywood, but he won't name names. So that becomes a problem. Now, with Rose McGowan, she was brave enough to come forward and point a finger at Weinstein. So that started the domino effect. But with, as you're mentioning, some of these men that have gone through similar situations when they were young boys in Hollywood, the names haven't come out yet. And until they do, unfortunately, it will continue to be a culture in Hollywood. So,
well, the sad part about it is we've been seeing it through the news media with the women in the news prior to the, quote, Hollywood set coming out with it. It's been an undercover situation that's been talked about behind the doors, but never as much in the public as it has been. Bill Cosby, that was another big blow starting things, because things are never what they seem. We have to really take a look at going forward, speaking your truth, but let's not over dramatize the areas that aren't the real issues, because then you lose the effect of what's really true.
Yeah, we want to know, who has been doing these kinds of things. If there's some legal issues involved, that they can be prosecuted, then terrific. But in this, there's a lot going on in Hollywood, and it's about time it comes out. It's about time people get to be treated fairly, whether they're male or female. It doesn't matter. Everybody deserves to be treated fairly. So it looks like, from what you're saying with the numbers, we're going to be seeing more of this coming out.
Throughout this coming year, most definitely. Between now and September of next year, we're going to get a big dose of it, but it's going to be even more prevalent after October of next year. Believe it or not.
Oh, my God.
Because there's so much more. It's like they're opening Pandora's box. And so people that have stayed quiet in the past, everybody's trying to cover their backside, the good, the bad, the ugly. It's all there. What we do with it, I hope somebody steps forward and makes it where people will honestly look at things instead of dramatizing or glamorizing the negative.
Yeah, let's see what can happen. Well, this is going to be a very interesting time. I mean, it's very tumultuous, but it's interesting, all these, because you had said before, secrets will be coming out, and you certainly were right about that. So here we are.
This month deals with some legal issues as well, so there's going to be more coming out.
Oh, my.
Yes.
Well, I'm glad we're on the right side of all of this.
Me too. I don't go on anybody's couch.
I haven't been on his casting couch. But anyways, we do have some fascinating stories on our Facebook page. Bigfoot has been spotted and photographed in California. And there's been a number of witnesses. They said this one is the real deal. It's on our Facebook page. Take a look at the photograph. We're very interested to hear what you think when you see this photograph of Bigfoot. I think it's the real deal. I really do. And then we also had... Yeah, it looked like it to me. There's also a story about blue-eyed Indians, Native Americans. Very interesting tribe, very different kind of tribe from the others that we have learned about from school or wherever we learned about it, but a blue-eyed Native American tribe. That article is also on our Facebook page, as well as UFO sightings, and there have been a ton of them that have come out recently. So there's lots and lots of stories out there. We still have creativestrength.us offering everybody a free scalar treatment for 15 days. No credit card, no charge. You can just sign up, send them your photograph, and you can have that treatment from Tom Palladino. He's going to be coming back on our show in the next couple of months, talking about some advances with the scalar energy. It should be very interesting. And as usual, we've got a big lineup of terrific guests. We've got cryptid guests and Bigfoot guests and more UFO stories, some that have never been told to the public before. And certainly tonight, we have got a great story. I can't tell you how much I love the name Charlie Red Star. Yeah. It's so personal, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it does. It makes you feel like you'd reach out and touch something.
It does. It makes you feel like, hey, I could have met this thing, this Charlie Red Star. So anyways, well, let's bring on our guest in 1 second. I just want to tell you a little bit about him because he's amazing. Grant Cameron has been a UFO researcher since 1975. That's a long time. It was recognized as both the Leeds Conference International Researcher of the Year and the UFO Congress Researcher of the Year. He is a world-renowned expert on UFOs, conspiracies, and government cover-ups, and has spent decades watching, chronicling developments around extraterrestrial contact. Okay, he lives in Winnipeg, and he's here with us tonight. So welcome to the show, Grant.
Thank you, Patricia and PK, for having me on. I appreciate your interest, and I think it'll be a good show.
It's going to be great.
Because you've got no doubt about that one, Grant.
That's right. You've got one of the best stories. I mean, this is one of the longest UFO flaps ever, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was pretty big. Unfortunately, I didn't really publicize it the way I should have. Like a lot of other sightings got publicized. And what happened with this was I got dragged into this in May of 1975. Really didn't have any interest in UFOs. I had interest in near-death studies. I had done a research project while I was at university at hospitals, talking to chaplains about, does anybody ever see somebody before they die? And this is when near-death experiences first started. I was asking that question, did anybody have near-death experiences? Did anybody ever predict their death? And all these weird questions surrounding death. So I had this fascination with death, and I had a fascination with Edgar Cayce, but I had no fascination with UFOs that I can think of, or extraterrestrial. The only reason I went out to this small town, which is called Carmen, Manitoba, Canada, which is just above the North Dakota border, maybe about 30 miles north of the border, is that everybody in the town was seeing this thing, and the local media was picking this thing up. And so I said to my friends, we used to drive around this city. I live in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, which is a pretty big city, 700,000 people. And I said, instead of driving around the city, why don't we go out to Carbon and see what everybody's looking at? And my friend said, this is maybe February or March of 1975. And my friend said, yeah, okay, we'll go. And we never did go. And then what happened in May of 1975, and I talk about in the book about this, there's a local TV affiliate, a private TV station that actually goes out there. Everybody's trying to film this thing. The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation was there, and the private people were there, and they were all trying to film this thing. And the CKY TV actually caught this thing on the ground. And they caught this thing jumping off the ground, and it sort of went viral. The film, they did a sort of an 8-minute documentary on this film and what had happened there. And G. Allen Hynek came down. The NBC picked up the story. It was sort of viral, and that's what I said to my friend. I said to Larry, my friend's name is Larry, and I said, come on, let's go see what they're looking at. And the way I always describe it is I bought the lottery ticket knowing there was a chance I could win, but knowing I wouldn't win a thing. It was like, we'll go. I mean, we're not going to see anything. Everybody else will see this thing. And it was already known as Charlie Red Star because it was fairly well publicized. The local newspaper in the town of Carmen was actually saying shop where Charlie Red Star shops, and it got the name from a woman who had written a poem about, because we have a lot of Aboriginals here, so it was Chief Charlie Red Star wrote this poem, and that's where it sort of got the idea that it was Chief Charlie Red Star, and it was, so everybody called it Charlie Red Star. So we went out on the night in question, and this was in late May 1975, and it was a month after the end of the Vietnam War, which I thought was kind of significant. And we went out there and we drove into town, out of the town, around the town, and we were driving around for an hour. And Larry said, okay, we'll drive back into town one more time. If we don't see anything, let's go home. I said, fantastic. This has been a total waste of time. And so we turned to go back into town, and then it happened. And I always tell people there's belief, there's disbelief. And if you have not seen anything, you can either believe or disbelieve, but that's all you can do. You cannot do anything else. And that's then there's the people who know. And when this thing appeared, it came from the left-hand side of the car, nobody in the car said, is that what they're looking at? Because we were driving around for an hour saying, what are they looking at? We're looking at the, different planets and stars. We didn't know what everybody's looking at. And I said, well, whatever they're looking at isn't very significant. But when it appeared, nobody said, well, is that what they're looking at? I wonder if that's what it is. Everybody just went, there it is. And there was one guy in the back seat. And it was just the most bizarre thing I'd ever seen. It looked like it was alive. It was like people will describe these plasma objects. So it was like a red plasma, very brilliant, pulsing very, very slowly, maybe once every second and a half, 2 seconds, very, very slow pulse to it, very low to the ground. It was only a couple hundred feet off the ground, if even that. And it was bobbing up and down. It wasn't flying in a straight line. It was sort of moving up and down like a bobber on a fishing line. And I was just, as I said, like in years after that, everybody else went on with their life, and I just sort of fell off the edge of the earth. I could not believe what I'd seen. Because I had been into bizarre stuff like near-death experiences and stuff like that, and so it always was something happened to somebody else. I'd never had anything happen to me. So when this happened, I just couldn't get enough. I dragged all my friends out 2 nights later, and they all went home after an hour and said, "We're staying. We're going home. We're tired of this." I said, "No, this will change your life. You got to see this. You got to stay and see this." I still remember the last words they said. "Nope. We're going back to Winnipeg. We're hungry. We're going for pizza." And all my friends took off and left about 8 people on this road. And about 15 minutes later, this is about 12:45 in the morning, I think it was, this thing appeared, and it appeared a little bit different than the first night. It was sort of what they called a bouncing ping pong ball. It was like a flash of light, and it was bouncing around the sky. And I remember there was a girl in the car beside us. There was 2 cars. There was about 5 people in our car, 4 for sure in their car. There was 3 guys and a girl, and I remember the girl couldn't see it because it was jumping around the sky, and everybody was yelling. It was like being in a football game where the home team is about to score, and people are swearing and they're yelling and screaming, and this poor girl's crying. She's saying, "I can't see it. Someone show it to me. I can't see it." And there was one guy in their car who had when Nikon motor drives first came out on camera, so it would advance the 35 millimeter film automatically. So all I can remember was this girl was crying. There was people yelling and screaming, and then I could hear this camera going click, zzz, click, zzz, click, zzz, and he was just literally unloading the camera as this thing was coming towards us. And it was very low to the ground. When it actually came in, the flashes stopped, and this object I'd seen the first night, this time it was coming directly at us, only a couple, maybe 100 feet, maybe a little bit more off the ground, coming directly at us. And I just couldn't believe it. And it made its turn, and it started to head sort of in a northeast direction. And I can remember just looking at it and saying, wow, that could be from another planet. I was just in awe of this thing, and just slowly flew off into the north, almost like it was burning gas. We used to make this joke. It's flying around burning gas because it didn't seem to be doing anything. It was just sort of flying along. And I remember the other car, they said, we're going to chase it because it was going so slow. And we did do this for the first year. We would chase this thing around, and you could actually catch up on it. It would go so slow, you could actually gain on this thing. So they took off. They took off after this thing, and I was just sort of, as I said, I fell off the edge of the earth. I figured, like, why is nobody investigating this? And so I went around the town and I started interviewing people who had seen this thing. And there were some of the names were public. And then every interview would always be the same. I'd say, I heard you saw something. And then the first question would be, who said I saw something? And then I'd say, oh, so-and-so said you saw something. And then they would always say, oh, I saw something, but it was really nothing. And I'd say, well, tell me about it. And then they start talking about it. And next thing you know, it was like a flying saucer sitting in the middle of the road, and they couldn't get their car around it. It was, there were some pretty bizarre stories. And then they would always end the interview the same way. I was the only one that saw it, And then they give you like 5 names of people, and then I'd go to those people, and they will start same. So who said I saw something? And I had hundreds of people on a list that I'd even interviewed. I interviewed all these people. I put all these stories back in the book, including one Sasquatch story that we can actually talk about. And we put it in the book. And I remember trying to get it published in about 1977, and all the publishers, basically, some of them looked at it, nobody really did it, and the local publisher who should have done it, because it was a famous story where I lived, and the local publisher said to me, Mr. Cameron, you may believe in this kind of stuff, count me among the unbelievers. And I went, wow, I couldn't believe it. I said, oh, this has been a total waste of time. And I really have not done sightings since. I gave the manuscript to my sister, and everybody has somebody in their family who's like the hoarder, the historian, collects everything. And so my sister kept the manuscript for like 30 years. And I had even forgotten I'd even written it. I knew I'd written some chapters. I knew I'd written something on it. There was a woman there in Carmen who'd helped me write it. And my sister gave me back this manuscript, which I looked at and I went, oh my goodness. I mean, it looked like it was a complete manuscript. So what happened then is it was at the time when digital scanning came in. So I digitally scanned this thing into a computer, and then I just would, for years, I would let people just read the manuscript. And then what happened, the story actually is more bizarre after the book is published. The book is actually published by a woman by the name of Taza Lawrence, who's a TV producer in Toronto, Canada. She has a big TV production studio there. And she wanted to do a story of the Mission Rama. If you've ever followed this story, this is the story I'm doing now, which I say I got dragged into after the book. I say it is the biggest story I've done in 42 years. I'm calling it Roswell 2.0. It's the most bizarre story I've ever run into, and I got dragged into it. I got a message from an alien. But anyway, so Taza Lawrence says to me,
you got an actual message from an alien?
Yeah, we can get into this in a second. So I'll tell you how it sort of sets up. So Taza contacts me. She said, I heard you got this manuscript of these sightings in Carmen. And I said, yeah. And she said, can I read the manuscript? So I said, sure. So I sent her a digital copy of the manuscript, and she read it, and she said, this is exactly what I'm looking for. I want to do a movie on this Project Rama. And the Project Rama was Sixto and Charles Paz in Peru. These are two kids in 1974. So it's the same time period as mine. They were a year before me. And it's the same sort of thing. It's like they're inundated with UFO sightings, and they one of them starts automatic writing. Sixto Paz starts getting these messages through automatic writing. And then they say to the alien, they say, are we talking to an alien? Or are we just talking to our higher self or our subconscious or whatever? And then the alien says, okay, go on this highway Saturday night and we'll show up. And so these two brothers go out there, and the thing shows up. So they drag their friends, almost the same as me. They drag their friends out there, and the thing shows up again. Then they actually have encounters where they go on the ship. They actually go on the ship. Then they bring their parents there. Their parents see it. Then they bring in this reporter from Spain comes, and the story's starting to pick up momentum. The Spain reporter is actually, it appears for this reporter from Spain, and he makes the thing, and it becomes famous. They're called Mission Rama, and the only reason people haven't heard of them is they're all Spanish. So they're not that well known. So anyway, Taza Lawrence wants to do this story about the Rama. So she's trying to get this thing financed, a full-length movie in Canada, and nobody will touch it because it's Peru. They say, who cares? Peru. We don't care about Peru. We're not going to finance anything. So that's when she comes to me for my manuscript, and she says to me, she said, well, you did this whole thing about all these sightings. And I said, yeah. And what we want to do is I want to option your book for this movie. And what we're going to do is we're going to change you into a reporter. And the reporter is going to go around Carmen, and he's going to be looking at all these sightings and all this sort of stuff, which you did in 1975. And all of a sudden, he's going to discover Mission Rama, and he's going to go to Peru, and he's going to find out, and he's going to go on the ship, and he's going to talk to these kids who are seeing this stuff like that. And so that's how it happened. So she's actually the one that got it through the publisher. She said, I need the book in print in bookstores for this movie, and it'll come out at the same time as the movie. So she went, she did all the work, and I got the contract from the publisher, and I didn't like the contract, so I didn't sign the contract, and I let it lapse or whatever. So then she came back and said, well, what happened? And I said, well, I didn't agree with this. I didn't agree with that. She said, well, you can negotiate, And I said, well, I really don't. I'm not a negotiator. I mean, if it's okay, I'll sign it. If it's not, I'm not going to go fight with people or negotiate or whatever. And so she went back a second time and negotiated a second time to get the Charlie Red Star book out. And so I figured, well, this time, Taza's gone through all this work. I better not embarrass her for a second time. I should play by the rules. So that's how the book came out. And anyway, this is the bizarre story, and you hear these synchronicity stories that happen in ufology, in paranormal phenomena. So the book comes out as the book is coming out. It's published. I'm going to an event in Mount Shasta, California, and this is these Latino people who are coming, and it's a contactee by the name of Ricardo Gonzalez, and he has an event at Mount Shasta every year, and it's a meditation for world peace. I have no interest in. I'm not against meditation. I'm not against world peace. I do meditation and stuff, but it's like, I'm going to go to Mount Shasta to meditate for world peace. And I was like, I don't really know. And anyway, the girl who helps me edit my books, I've done about 6 different books on different subjects, paranormal subjects. She's helped me. She's a legal secretary in Los Angeles, and she's really into this stuff. She's Latino. She's originally from Colombia, and she says, come to this meditation thing. And she's always helped me. She's always done this kind of stuff. So I said, okay, Katerina, I'll come to Shasta. I'll come to this meditation. And it's all in Spanish. So you don't even know what's going on anyway. You're sitting there, you don't know anybody who's talking about. And they're all meditating. There's like 150 people show up for this thing, and they're all Latinos. They're from all around the world. It's the most bizarre thing. And there's only about 5 English people. And so I go to this thing, and as I'm coming through the desert, I'm with a girl from Winnipeg. Her name is Desta. She's a sort of a channeler, kind of an interesting girl. I'm coming through the desert, and all of a sudden her cell phone rings. And on the cell phone is Katerina, and she said, I've got a message from Paula Harris. I don't know if you've ever interviewed Paula Harris. She's in Boulder, Colorado. She runs a big conference in Laughlin, Nevada, where I'm actually going to tell this story next month. She's in Laughlin, Nevada, does this big conference there every November. And this message is from Paula to Grant Cameron, and it's from Antarel. And Antarel is this alien that is connected with Mount Shasta. And Antarel says, Antarel knows that Grant is coming to the mountain, and it's coming through Ricardo Gonzalez, who's the guy who gets the automatic writing, who gets the messages. So Ricardo says Antarel knows Grant's coming to the mountain, and there's going to be a programmed sighting, is what they call it, Saturday night. So this is Wednesday. And so I'm going, whoa, it's like, this is the second time I've got a message from an alien. So I knew from the first experience to listen, even though it sounds pretty weird. And so I figure, okay, all these Latino people, they all fast. They all do the vegetarian thing. So I'll play the game. So I go to this thing, and I knew that in 2014, 2015, the being had actually landed. And this is where the story gets really interesting. He had actually landed in the forest. It's what the Latinos call a zendra. Here we call them portals, but it's a zendra where what they do is they create a bubble. And they create this bubble. It's sort of an interdimensional bubble. And what you do is they take 7 people into the bubble. And I knew that in 2014, 7 people had gone in, and there was 4 people outside who could actually see the alien. The alien lands. These people go in the bubble. And so I figure, okay, we're going to get to see the alien. Or, Saturday night, there's going to be this program thing.
Sure.
And
You're going to finally see him.
I'm going to see an alien. I thought this is pretty, so I do the fasting and I do all this sort of stuff. But what happens is during the day on Saturday, as we're waiting for this thing, and they're doing meditation and they're doing all this different stuff, I get Paula Harris, and I've been friends with Paula Harris for a number of years. So I said, Paula, tell me, where did this actually happen, where Antarel came down? And she starts walking across the field towards this forest. And we're up on Mount Shasta, up about 3,500 feet. And so I got my movie camera. So I start the movie camera going, and I'm walking across the field with her. She starts telling me this story, and it's actually bizarre when you're actually there. And then I'm standing by this little tree. He's standing on the other side of that log, and she's like 30 yards away from this being. And he's talking. She can't understand him. He's like 9 feet tall. He's wearing sort of a hood over top. He's got the silver hair. And so I'm filming this whole thing. And then we go down a little bit down the way, and she shows me a 2015 event took place. And so the 2014 event, there was 11 witnesses. The 2015 one, there was 9 witnesses. And it's almost like the Charlie Red Star, the Carmen thing. I'm going, why is nobody investigating this? This is the most bizarre thing, especially when you're actually standing on the site where it's happening. And I'm saying, and she's saying, Saul is standing here, and these other people, Mercedes is standing here, and Ricardo's standing behind me, and she's naming all these people, and I know who all these people are. So then she says, well, a lot of them are here. I said, well, can I interview them? So I started interviewing these people, and I'd go up to them with the camera, and they all were scattering. Nobody wanted to get interviewed. And she would gather them together, and she would say, tell Grant what happened. And then I'd say, did you see this alien? And they go, yeah, I saw him. And I said, what did he look like? And he said he was about 9 feet tall, and he had the second year he had like a bicycle suit, and everybody described the same bicycle suit. He was very muscular, and he had this. The bizarre thing was he had this thing on his chest with a triangle, and these sparks were coming off his chest. And everybody described the same sparks coming off this guy's chest. And I'm thinking, why is nobody investigating this? This is the most bizarre. And so I start filming these people, and I've filmed, I guess, about 7 people now, and I'm thinking, this is the most bizarre thing. I'm thinking, like, what can the skeptics possibly say? I mean, you've got 11 people who are standing within 30 or 40 yards of an alien, depending where they're standing,
exactly.
And they're describing the same thing. It's like, and so I put it on Facebook. I put some of the videos that I take, and I put them up on Facebook, and it was, I was actually shocked. It was like the one guy said, like, I won't use the word he used, but he swore, and it's like, well, how long did it take you to think about that? You know, it was like there was nothing. Like the one person said, oh, the too much mountain air. And then someone said, oh, Paula's a contactee. I don't trust her now. And it's like, there's 11 people. Forget about Paula. And so this is the whole thing.
Well,
so I get dragged into this whole thing.
We got to take a very short break, but I do want to tell you something.
Yeah.
We know all about Sisto because we had Don Oscar. Remember Don Oscar, PK?
Yes,
the shaman from Peru was on our show, and he told us all about Sisto, and he happened to be there. And I will share more with everybody after the break about what Don Oscar told us he saw, which goes right along with what you're talking about.
Wow.
So everybody stay tuned. This is a great show. We are speaking with Grant Cameron, Charlie Red Star. You're listening to Supernatural Girls Radio. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone, to Supernatural Girls Radio. I'm your host, Patricia Baker. I am here with my co-host, PK, at patriciakirkman.com. In case you want to take a look at your numbers for the coming year, that's where you want to go, and you want to set up an appointment with Patricia Kirkman. Again, that's patriciakirkman.com. And we are speaking tonight with an amazing guest. We're so happy to have him here. His name is Grant Cameron, and he wrote this beautiful book, Charlie Red Star. It's a great book, everybody. And we're just talking about what a small world it is, because we know who Sisto is, that Grant was just talking about, because Don Mira, the shaman from Peru, was on our show. He's been on our show twice. He's one of our favorite guests. And he's an amazing shaman, and he was one of the witnesses to Sisto being taken up in the UFO. And in our last interview with Don Oscar, he told the best story about Sisto being taken up in this UFO. So if you haven't heard that interview, go to our archives and listen to it. One of the funniest stories that you will ever hear. Very shocking. I mean, they actually took Sisto with them for 3 days. 3 days later, they dropped him back off. So you got to hear Don Oscar tell that story. It's a great one. So, Grant, my gosh, so go on. You've got all these projects ahead of you now, and more interviews to
well, I'm doing this story of the Peruvian contactees, especially at like 2000. What I found out was that they had the event in 2014, 2015, where it landed in the bush, and they had like 11 witnesses the first time, 9 the second time. And then I found out I was coming down the hill, and these synchronicity things are just bizarre. Coming down the hill, and this woman had heard me talking a little bit, and she said, "Oh, thanks for the talk." She says, "I got a really weird story." And I said, "Oh, really? Would you tell it on camera?" She said, "You put it on camera?" I said, "Yeah." So I stand right there. I don't know what she's talking about. And 2016 was the 1 year that they didn't do the flyby, or they didn't land or anything like that. And so she starts talking about 2016. She's from Mexico, and she got these numbers in her head. She can figure out what these numbers are. And then she gets the numbers, and she figures out its coordinates, and it's Mount Shasta. She's trying to figure out, why should I go to Mount Shasta? And she eventually figures out she's supposed to go to this meditation thing. So she comes, and she said, there's some sightings and stuff, nothing out of the ordinary. And then she's down in the crystal shop. I don't know if you've ever been to Mount Shasta. There's a town there, and there's all these crystal shops and New Age places and stuff. And there's this big giant crystal shop that we were actually in. And she said she's in the crystal shop, and this Evika, who is like the female alien in this crew that is the commander, is there, and she's very, very tall, a woman, very, very tall, and she's walking around in this crystal shop, and the woman says, "I'm looking around, and nobody's noticing her." She's walking around, and then she's trying to get a hold of her friend, her girlfriend, and her girlfriend's playing on her cell phone. She's trying to say, "Evika's here, look, she's right there," and she describes this whole thing, and so then you get that synchronicity, and then there's a woman who was in the event when I was there in 2017. They said there would be this programmed event, and then Ricardo, who's the contactee, who's sort of like runs the whole thing. He's sort of like a Sixto Paz type guy, and he gets the message. It's going to be 9:33. The event is going to take place, and there's a woman who's a PhD psychologist. Her husband's a neurologist, so I can't out her, but she gets the message. She actually showed me the message. 9:33. This would happen. We're sitting there at 9:33 on like last August. And all of a sudden, this flash occurs. It was the weirdest thing. This is how I get dragged in. Like when this producers doing this story about Rama. I have no interest whatsoever. Like, I don't care. Option the book. I'm not interested in this contactee story. And suddenly I'm in the middle of this thing. Now this Antarel is from the same planet. He's not the alien that Sixto was dealing with. Oxtolt, I think was the name, and this one is Antarel, but it's from the same planet. The planet is Apu. So suddenly I'm in the middle of this Rama story that's part of this book thing, and I look up over my head. It's 9:33 this happens. I don't realize that two people have made this prediction, and this usually happens. There's a prediction exactly what's going to take place. I look up, and there's this flash of light above my head. And I look at this thing. Somebody saw it before me because they were beaming that, one of these laser beams above my head. And I look up. I guess I got the second flash, and there's a brilliant flash. And I'm looking for the object. I'm looking, and I can't see any object. And then it flashes exactly the same spot again. And then I put my head down because it was so high above me. And I'm thinking to myself as I'm looking up, I'm going, this is going to sound really egotistical because it looks like it's right above my head. And I'm thinking, it can't be above my head. It's got to be above the group because there's a group of 130 people and everybody's oming, everybody's meditating, trying to raise the vibration of this group. And this thing is happening over my head. And I'm thinking, no, it looks like it's right above my head. And other people in the group said the same thing. It looked like it was above my head. And this is the whole thing. I had been told that Antarel was going to come, and then there was, I think, about 8 flashes over about 30 seconds. All the flashes were in the same place. I remember there was this giant cheer, and the people said they'd been there for years. Nobody ever saw this sort of giant cheer and applause, and this giant flash went off above my head. And so when it was over, then Ricardo sits down and he said, "I've got a message from Antarel," and it's pitch black. We're in the middle of the night. It's pitch black. His wife takes the cell phone. She puts the cell phone. He has this little tiny, looks like a little diary, a little black diary. Opens the diary, and the first time I've ever seen anybody do automatic writing. And I was like, where's my camera? Why don't I have my camera now? Because he's writing, and he's like across the page, and he's writing like a mile a minute. And his wife is holding the cell phone, and to light up the thing, and he turns the page, and he goes like this, and there's the girl beside me that got the message on her cell phone is a channeler. And I said, look, he's doing automatic writing. She says, no, I think he's just channeling. And I said, no, it looks like automatic writing to me. And he was like going a mile a minute. And all of a sudden, he was going across the page. And all of a sudden, he was going sort of sideways on the page. And then he's going straight up and down. And I said, look, he's going straight up and down the page. This is the most bizarre thing. And he's going a mile a minute. He's writing up and down the page and turning pages as he's writing. And she said, no, it's just the way he's holding the book. And I said, no, he's going up and down on the page. And then he closes the book and he sits there like in a meditative state. And all of a sudden, gets up again, opens the page, and starts writing again. And so he gets a message from Antarel. And the second message, when he does another one, is from the Savika, who was down in the crystal shop. And I'm thinking, like, you can't make this stuff up. And then I find out the woman that made the prediction of the 933, this psychologist who works with autistic children and stuff, that there was an event in 2008. She was there, and there was a Zendra there, and she was the only one allowed into the Zendra. Then I found out there was an event in 1994 at Shasta with 49 people went through this Zendra, 7 at a time going into the Zendra, and one of them is a United Airlines 747 pilot who's on the record. And I'm thinking, like, this is the most bizarre story. And so I'm basically writing up this story. This is my next book. And I'm busy trying to track these people down. And a lot of them are going off the record because I said, fine, whatever. And what I find is that once the people have the encounter with the alien seems to follow them around. They get messages. The thing shows up at birthday parties. And it's like he's following these people around. And
what about
even,
you?
When I talked to the psychologist, she said, like a lot of people getting predictions as well. When I talked to the psychologist, she said, "Oh, I've got another message for you." And I go, "You got another message?" And it's like, well, what's that? "Oh, you're supposed to write about this." And I said, "I think I already figured this out," because when I saw these people, I'm thinking, somebody's got to write this down. This has got to be an easy book. 2012, 2013, there's an event. Right. 2014, 2015, 2016, 17, you just put them in chapters. It'd be a simple thing just to put it out, because a lot of my books I self-publish. So you just put it out, put it on the record, and get this bizarre story. Because to me, it came down to, like, what can the skeptics possibly say? With 11 witnesses who are all saying the same thing and who are face-to-face with an alien, to me, that's better than any story I've done in 42 years.
It's a great story, and I hope you are writing it as we as we speak here because it's fantastic. And like I said, we'll put you in touch with Don Oscar too, because you may find him a very interesting part of this story. And again, for everybody who wants to hear that interview, it's in our archives. It's the second interview that we did with Don Oscar. It's mind-boggling. So let me get to some of these questions, Grant, because you've got a lot of people having a lot of questions for you. Let's see. How did the local government and police, this is from Bloody Marandra, how did the local government and police handle the questions from the resident of this town? Now they're talking about in Manitoba.
Okay, well, it's sort of the skeptical thing that we had the federal police force was there. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police was stationed in the town. They don't have their own police force. And two other police officers, the RCMP guys, said they saw it, and they were transferred out. And then I tell a story in the book, this bizarre story where we have this light on the road. They put these little monitors down on the ground. They're like small orb-type objects that are on the ground. And I'm flashing lights at it. And then this big object comes and sits right on top of the car. And minutes after that, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police pulls in behind the car. And I've got these kids in the back seat. And I said to the kids, watch this. I'm going to get this guy. So the Royal Canadian Mounted Police guy comes up. I roll down the window, and he sticks his flashlight in, and he says, so what's going on here? Because we're in the middle of nowhere. Like, there's no towns or anything. Because we're sitting in the middle of the country and completely dark and stuff. And I said, see that object? And this clear triangle with two red lights on the front and a green light in the back. This clear triangle still flying away. And he looks up and he goes, yeah, I see it. And I said, well, we're looking at these lights down at the end of the road. And he said, what lights? I said, well, turn your lights off and I'll show you. So this Royal Canadian Mounted Police guy turns off his lights, and the kids are all excited because they know what's going on. They knew it. And so I take the flashlight, and these things are very responsive, whatever people say. They're responsive to lights. So I look, and there's nothing there. So I take the flashlight, and I put it up in the air, put the flashlight back down, and this sort of light appears, and it goes up in the air, comes back down again, and then this other light appears. So there's always two, and the one would do what we call the tricks. So the one, and I put it from side to side, and it would fly like a leaf back and forth across the road. And this Royal Canadian Mounted Police guy is looking, and he says, oh, he's probably just a couple of guys down the end of the road having a beer. And then I said, oh, we've been following it for about 6 miles now. And I guess he suddenly, it occurred to him, triangle in the sky, light on the ground. And I had been written up in the local newspaper because I was going to jump on one of these small objects. I got within 75 feet of one of these small objects one time, and the paper had written it up. So I guess he suddenly realized who it was and realized, like, I'm not getting on the record. So he starts going towards his car, and he's walking faster and faster. And then he starts running towards his car. And I said to the kids, get his license plate number. And the guy jumps in his car. And remember, this is a federal police officer. Jumps in his car, and he takes off, and the gravel's flying. And there's these three kids with flashlights running down the road with flashlights, getting his license plate number. So the media, the police stayed off the record. The government in Ottawa, the federal police, or the federal people, it went to the National Research Council, and they came up with this thing. They said, oh, it looks like the Winnipeg to Las Vegas Frontier Airlines flight. And it was like, come on already.
Please.
I mean, because we would see this thing overnight, and at 35,000 feet, it's this little flashing light, 35,000 feet up. And it's like you're like banging your head against the wall. So that was basically what it came down to.
Oh, my God. Well, here's another question for you. This is from Francis Savage, who's asking, do you think that Canadians are just as passionate about UFOs as Americans are?
Oh, absolutely. But in case it comes down to if you've seen it. If you've seen it, you become obsessed, which is basically the people in the UFO community, anybody who's had a close encounter or something, it's something you can't shake. It's an obsession. So the general public, they like the stories. In fact, the Charlie Red Star book is one of the most popular books, even though I don't think it's the most important book. I dealt with the U.S. president. I have the president's UFO website. I've chased around. I talked to Dick Cheney. I've done all that kind of stuff. And people aren't as interested in that as they are in just a good story. They want a good story. And that's where the U.S. government is now leaking this stuff. And what they're doing is they're going through Steven Spielberg, through J.J. Abrams, and they're putting these things through Hollywood. Because that's the way it works, is that the people who aren't interested or claim that I'm interested may be interested. They just don't want anybody to know. So what you want to do, if you want to gradually release the stories, you put it through the media, through a Hollywood movie, because then those people can sit there and watch it. Nobody knows they're watching it. Or indirectly, subconsciously, you could put the message through, which is what I think is this Aunt Terrell thing is doing. Like people said to me with this ground thing where they said, oh, forget about the circus. This has got to do with a meditation for world peace. I said, no, this is a circus. He wants people people to see this thing, because if you tell people I've got a message for you, they say, get out of here. But if you tell them the story, I was looking at an alien 20 yards away, and then he gave me this message, then they're listening, because there's part of a circus. So that's why you need the whole movie deal, and then you indirectly drop the message through. And that's what the U.S. government is doing. There's no doubt the government is doing this. They're putting messages through Hollywood.
Yes, I'm not surprised to hear that. Now, here's another question. This is from Attar Doran. When exactly was the first sighting reported, and when did it end?
It went on. The first one was reported in February of 1975, and that is exactly, and this is what I talk about in the book, it exactly coordinates with the only anti-ballistic missile unit that ever went operational in the world, went operational in February of 1975, about 80 miles south of Carmen in a town called Nakoma, North Dakota. And North Dakota was a place where, if it had been a country, it would have been a nuclear superpower. Had 300 Minuteman nuclear missiles with 3 warheads on them each. And we all knew in Winnipeg that if the Americans and the Russians ever got into it and there's a nuclear war, we were the first to go, because every Russian missile is going to land short right on top of us. So we all knew that North Dakota had these missiles. So what happened was, this is pre-Star Wars, in 1980, Reagan wanted to put it in outer space, but in 1975, they had built it on the ground. And what they had done in February of 1975, they had installed 100 more nuclear missiles in North Dakota, and that was to protect the missiles in North Dakota, because the number one target of the Russians is not Washington, it's not LA, it's not New York, it's the missiles. Because unless you take out the missiles, you ain't going to see what happens to Washington. You've got to take out the American missiles before you can go for the city.
How interesting.
So they were trying to knock out these missiles. So the period of time was from February till about the end of the year, when it was very, very heavy. And that's when the Americans negotiated with the Russians in November of 1975, agreed to shut down the only anti-ballistic missile unit. They started taking the missiles out, and the UFOs went away. And I had, in the book, I talk about one girl who actually took me to a missile silo, and it's still an operational missile silo, a Minuteman III missile silo, in the Minot range, in the Minot missile base. And she even told me the story that they go to the fence. What they would do is, the kids, what they would do, they lived in this town called Coolsroot, North Dakota. It was a little tiny town, about 300 people. And what they would do for entertainment is they'd go to the missile silo and they'd throw stones at the fence, and they'd try to climb over the fence or whatever. And there was a big, huge tower that had a yellow light on it. And what they would try to do is get the yellow light to go off, and then they'd run as fast as they could back to town before the security came. And that was their entertainment. So she said they went to throw stones at the fence one time, 3 girls about 9 years old, and they were looking, and this UFO came out, and she took me. I was actually there, took pictures at the missile silo, and I said, well, where did you see the UFO? She said, it came out of that metal thing over there. I said, are you sure it came out of the metal thing? She said, yeah, it came right out of that metal thing. And that's where the missiles, right underneath the metal. That's the roof of the missile silo. And she said this object was bronze or copper colored. It was like a big ball. It was spinning at a high rate. It looked like it burn marks on it. It was about 25 feet apart, above the thing. She said she wet her pants. The other girls were running home, and she was no doubt an experiencer, because she would talk about sightings that she'd had. But we'd get all these reports of, in 1975, for example, we know, because the NORAD documents were leaked, that every major SAC base on the Canadian-U.S. border, and that was Loring Air Force Base, Worth Smith Air Force Base, Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota, and Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana, were all visited by UFOs in 1975, and they were inside the weapon storage area where they kept the nuclear missiles. And these were all signals. So to me, the UFO thing is all about signaling. It's all about messaging. They're not here to steal our gold. They're not here to save us or do anything. They're here to give us messages. You're ruining the planet. You're not going according to the oneness principle. There's all these different messages they bring out. And so that's what 75 was about. It was this whole messaging thing. Is they were very upset about the nuclear missiles. That was the tie into. Yes. As soon as they took the missiles out, the UFOs, and the head guy at the airport, who I'm about to interview now on camera, I asked him, I said, Bob, and he's a fairly famous aviator guy. I said, Bob, how many sightings do you have in 1975? And he said, about 150, I guess. I said, how many did you have after 1976? And he goes, none. It was like they took the drugs out of the water. They were there for a year. They went away, and nobody's had a sighting there since. So to me, it had to do with those nuclear missiles.
Now, okay. Now, here's a question from Greco. He wants to know, how many witnesses are we talking about here? So in this big UFO flap in Manitoba, how many witnesses did you find?
Well, I can tell you, I did a poll. It's in the book. I did a poll at the high school, which had, I'm not sure how many kids, 500 kids in the high school, and over 50% of them said they'd seen it. In the last 2 years, they said, have you seen an object that would be identified as a UFO? I asked them how many had seen a 747 actually up, in seen face to face, not like in a picture or anything. And there was more people that seen UFOs than 747s. So it was very high, and it would go to towns and lecture where the sightings didn't take place, and it would be 11%. That's the national average. But in town, I would say that half the people in the town, most of them wouldn't admit it. And that's when I did the book, I actually had to change all the names because the publisher wanted a release from everybody who had been quoted. I said, well, number one, half the people are dead, and number two, the other half ain't signing no release because they don't want their names.
Yeah.
And so we changed all the names in the book, but lots. And then there were certain towns where Carmen was the heaviest. Then you'd have other towns where you'd have a lot of sightings, but we never had any real numbers. But it was very, very high numbers of people who saw it.
Okay, and here's another question from Walking Dead. Wants to know, didn't the Canadian government have someone who claimed to be an alien contactee?
Absolutely. This is where when I got this whole thing with the Apu planet, where I got my message, and I already knew about contactees because the guy who ran the Canadian government UFO program from 1950 to 1954 was actually a contactee, and we kept it very secret for a number of years. Because now it's kind of okay to be a contactee. In those days, in the 70s, it wasn't okay to be a contactee. You were seen to be like a nutcase. And he ran this project from 1950 to 1954. And he has the most famous document that I say, the UFO document. It was a document because he was a very high-level guy in the Canadian government. He was the chief radio engineer, and he also ran Radio Ottawa, which was like the NSA of Canada. They would be picking off Russian communications stuff. So he would be down in Ottawa, in Washington, and in 1950, he was interested in UFOs, so he put a message through to the Americans and through the Canadian Embassy in Washington, and what they wanted to know from the Americans is, what's the deal with flying saucers? And he writes a top-secret memo in November of 1950, and in that top-secret memo, he said, we made discreet inquiries through the Canadian Embassy in Washington, and we were told the following things by the Americans. Flying saucers exist. It's the most highly classified subject in the United States, rated 2 points higher than the hydrogen bomb, which wouldn't be detonated till 2 years later. There's a small group headed by Dr. Vannevar Bush who's trying to figure out how they operate. The subject is of tremendous significance to the Americans, and he also said, and we've also been told by American officials, that other things might be associated with the flying saucers, such as mental phenomena. And they aren't doing very well because they said if we're working on it, they're willing to exchange credentials and talk to us. So in 1950, they knew flying saucers existed, and they knew that there was a mental connection to it. Now we know aliens are telepathic. We know this. We know there's this consciousness connection to the UFO subject. In 1950, nobody was talking to aliens. Betty and Barney Hill weren't around. There was the first contactees wouldn't appear till a couple of days after the detonation of the hydrogen bomb in 1952. Yeah. Nobody was talking to aliens, so how did they know that there was a mental connection to UFOs?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Look, let's hang on to that thought. We got to get back to this one. We're going to take another very short commercial break, and we will be right back. You are listening to Supernatural Girls Radio. We'll be back. Welcome back, everyone, to Supernatural Girls Radio. I'm your host, Patricia Baker. I'm here with my co-host, PK, and our amazing guest tonight. It is Grant Cameron, who's the author of this book, which we highly recommend.
How about that?
Charlie Red Star. It is a great book with a great name.
Fabulous.
It's amazing.
It really is.
Yes.
It really is.
It's a super book. Okay, so you're going to give us the name of the alien now. When we left off, we were talking about this.
The alien's name was Afa, and there was a second one was called Tyla. And Tyla's job was to clean up all the radioactive contamination that was occurring from above-ground nuclear testing. And the Canadian government actually was going to land Afa at an Air Force base in 1954. And I don't know if you ever had Paul Hellyer on the show. Paul Hellyer actually gave a speech. He was the defense minister for Canada. In 1967 was the Canadian Centennial, and Paul Hellyer opened a UFO landing base at St. Paul, Alberta. It was a centennial project by this small town. It was got a tourist thing where, UFO landing base, and they got flags and all this type of stuff. So Paul goes there to open this base, and he said, this isn't the first time we've had a UFO landing base. We actually had one in 1954 at a place called Suffield, Alberta. And Suffield was like the Canadian equivalent of Area 51. It was an army base which had a no-fly zone over it. They had done nerve gas testing there in World War II. Big, huge area, part of Alberta, open area. And so when this story came out, Paul mentioned this story, but he didn't really give the details. So when Wilbur Smith, the guy who had run the Canadian government program, had died by then. So I went to talk to his wife, who was the secretary of the Speaker of the Senate. So she was fairly high herself. And I showed her the article in the newspaper from Paul Hellyer, and I said, was Wilbur behind this? And she read the article about the landing base and said, yeah, that was Wilbur. And I said, well, what happened? And she said, well, Wilbur had said, if you quit trying to shoot the thing down, I will get AFA to land and you can talk to him. And so then there was an agreement made with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, which is the federal police force, the Department of Defense, and the Prime Minister of Canada, the cabinet, and they couldn't get 100% agreement from the cabinet that they would allow it to take off. They all agreed to allow it to land without shooting it down, but then there was some disagreement as to what would happen once it was on the ground. And then Wilbur said, okay, that's it. We're calling it off. I mean, I can't get the agreement. We're calling it off. And so that's where the story comes out, that they opened up the base. And so when Paul Hellyer told the story, he said, nothing ever landed, therefore UFOs don't exist. Well, he didn't tell the rest of the story, was the fact that they couldn't get an agreement that they would allow it to take off. So Wilbur was getting all these messages from these aliens. And it was, the message about nuclear weapons was the big one. And AFA had said, like most experiencers, because I deal a lot with experiencers, most experiencers will say, your number one messages are oneness. 55% of all experiencers say they're talking about oneness and love. 39% are saying that they see the screen. I ask them, have you seen the screen on the ship? Oh, yeah, I saw the screen. The screen has the environmental images. We're destroying the planet and stuff. So AFA had given Wilbur the message about intervention. He said, unless there's a nuclear exchange, we will not step in. If there's a nuclear exchange, we can step in and stop it. And to prove that we could do it, we could take the moon in front of the entire world, split it in half, put it back together in microseconds to prove that we could do it. But other than a nuclear exchange, the words, according to AFA, was, we will allow the human race to stew in its own juices. And that's this whole non-intervention idea that you have to learn your own lessons. You can't do your kids' homework. So there was all these bizarre stories about messages. The Americans were sending material to Canada, hardware material that was being analyzed by Wilbur Smith and his crew. Very, very bizarre story. It's sort of written up in bits and pieces, and he actually got an entire book called The New Science that was actually dictated to him. It says right in the front of the book, it says, given to me by beings more advanced than we are. The entire book was how the universe works and how everything operates. It was called The New Science, and Wilbur actually didn't even finish it. He died of cancer. The last chapter I don't think got in there, but up to that, this book, there was a couple hundred copies published. Most of them went to Russia or the Scandinavian countries. I've got 2 copies of the book. It's a very, very rare book, but here's a guy back in the 1950s. Now, I mean, it's kind of cool to be, a contactee or an abductee where you're, in contact with aliens. People really don't look at you that way, but in the 1950s, it was pretty bad to be a contactee. Mm-hmm. And you got to remember, this was the top guy. This is the guy who ran the Canadian government UFO program and was in contact with all high military people in the United States. And at the end of his life, I talked to his son, and some of his inside people were talking about this as well. I said to his son, I heard that your father told you he had seen the bodies. And he said, yes, his father had been taken by the American military and had been shown the bodies and the craft. And I said, where? And he said, it was outside Washington. The idea, it was at Andrews Air Force Base outside of Washington. And the first question I said was, well, were they grays? And he said, no, they weren't grays. My father said that they were like human-type beings, smaller than we were, but they were human-type beings. And that was the whole idea that grays really didn't exist until the 1960s. Before 1960s, nobody's talking about grays. And Wilbur Smith basically told his son before he died that, yes, he had seen the craft, and that there's nothing they can do to me now. Yes, this is true. And he'd actually told his wife when he died, he said, when I die, the Americans, the Russians, everybody's going to come looking for my files. And his wife, who was Secretary of the Speaker of the Senate, said as soon as he died, they started appearing. The Russians appeared, the Americans appeared, and the Canadians appeared, all looking for the files for research purposes. And she said to them all, no, I destroyed the files. I don't have the files. And she said that's when the break-in started. And she said it was quite evident they were looking for the files because nothing would be taken. There would be a break-in taking place. Right. Nothing would be missing. And she had actually moved the files to her son's place. This is the guy who told me that he talked to his father before he died. So it's a very bizarre story of the Canadians having this very direct contact with an alien by the name of Alpha. And actually the CIA, there's this related story that one of the main contacts he was using for Alpha was a woman out of Elliott, Maine, who actually lived down the road from Betty Hill. And she was in contact with Alpha. And she actually, I have a book called Alien Bedtime Stories where I tell this story, where she actually taught a Navy intelligence guy to channel this Alpha. And she was doing automatic writing. She was actually getting in her head. She didn't have to do the automatic writing. She teaches this Navy intelligence guy how to channel this alien. He goes back. He's a member of the CIA. They go back to what's called the National Photographic Interpretation Center in Washington, D.C., where they actually channel this alien. And the briefer for the president, the guy who briefed Kennedy on the Cuban Missile Crisis, his name was Arthur Lundahl, was fascinated with UFOs, was actually running the questioning. So he said, the guy would sit down, he'd go into trance. Then he said, okay, what's your name? Alpha. Is there a special race that you're favored? No. Is there a special religion? No. And all these questions. And then Lundahl says to the guy who's in trance, he says, we'd like some proof. And then the guy goes from automatic writing to voice. He said, what would you like? And he said, we'd like to see you. And then the guy says, Alpha says, when? He says, now. And then he says, go to the window. And there's a documentary on the internet. It's called UFOs It Has Begun. You can look this documentary. And Robert Friend, who is the head of Blue Book, ran Blue Book for a number of years, the U.S. Air Force project, actually tells his story, and he's in the room telling the story. So it's not something I'm making up. He tells the story, and he was called in 2 days later. And what happens is they go to the window, and they all go to the window, and they're looking out, and you can see the Capitol in this video. He's looking at the Capitol, and this flying saucer flies by in the day, and they all look at this thing. So they call Robert Friend at Blue Book at Wright-Patterson, and they say, you got to see this, top secret. Bring him in for this top secret meeting. 2 days later, this is July of 1959. They bring him in, they put this guy back into trance again, they get in contact with Alpha, and they say, we want you to fly by the window again. And he said, the time isn't right, and they call it off. And so Friend goes back and he says, this is the most dramatic case he'd ever seen. And he goes to his general at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. He said, we need to investigate this woman and this story. And they say, another agency is handling it. Keep your hands off. And that means the CIA is dealing with it. And after that, nobody knows what happened to this case. But there's a bunch of people in the late 50s who were in contact with this alien by the name of Alpha. And one of the things they had stated was that there was two big satellites 100 miles across that were going around the world. And this Francis Swan, the one that was from Elliott, Maine, who was dealing with Alpha, had made these predictions. And they actually detected. It's in Aviation Week. It's in New York Times. It's in a lot of things where in 1954, they detected two objects rotating the Earth. And the explanation that was given was that these were natural satellites. Well, if they're natural satellites, they'd still be going around the Earth. They aren't going around the Earth. And it basically substantiated the fact that there may have been these two huge spaceships in 1954 that were flying around, and that the Canadian government and the CIA were actually in contact with these two spaceships that were orbiting the Earth.
Incredible stories. Wow. And now we asked this of all the UFO experts that come on our show. We'd like to know your opinion, Grant. Clearly, the United States government wants to keep all of this under wraps. Why? Why do you think they're...
I wrote a book called Managing Magic. And I say, no, that's not what's happening. What I say is, and I'm doing a webinar tomorrow night on this whole thing. If you're following the Tom DeLonge story, Tom DeLonge's famous rock guy who claims he's got all these high-level government people. He does have high-level. Okay, so
Tom
I'm doing
DeLonge.
a webinar. I'm going to do a webinar tomorrow night, and I'm going to explain this whole thing. What I say is going on. There's three options. Either they're covering up. They're not covering up, because if they were covering up, they would do what Canada, Great Britain, Australia, Peru, Brazil, every other country in the world has done. You would just shut up and quit talking about it. They're leaking. I mean, I got an invite to be a part of a program from the CIA, and I said, well, I don't want to play the game. They're leaking this stuff big time. If they wanted it to disappear, they do what Canada did. The Canadians ran an operation from 50 to 54. Everybody always asks me, well, you deal with the U.S. president. What about Canada? What's going on in Canada? And I always say the same thing. I have not the foggiest notion who in Canada is involved, what's going on. They shut the program down in 1954. I have no idea. The United States of America is the only place where you get leaks of documents, of whistleblowers. It only happens in the United States. It doesn't happen in any other country where you get these whistleblowers. People will say, oh, the other countries have disclosed their documents. I say, no, they haven't disclosed their documents. All they have done is release their sighting files. That's the junk stuff. That's like some guy writes a letter to the president. Oh, I've seen a UFO. That doesn't mean anything. What the files you want to see is the top secret files. Like I referred to this Canadian government document, the top secret file where it says flying saucers exist. We're talking to the Americans. The Americans told us this. None of those files. Nobody's released those. So they're not covering up, but they're not disclosing either. Because if they wanted to disclose, they would go to New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, Fox News. They'd have a news conference. They'd show them where the bodies are. They'd show them the crafts. They'd bring in the president. They'd do that kind of stuff. So they're not disclosing, and they're not covering up. They're doing something in between, which is this Brookings Institute putting out a study in the early 1960s which said you have to acclimatize the people to what's going on. You cannot drop this into the population, because it's well known. In the book Managing Magic, I have a chapter called The 64 Reasons They Decided Not to Tell You the Truth. And there are some very good reasons. The stock market might just melt down, and there's nothing you will be able to do to stop it. If suddenly somebody says, oh, this will be a great way to make money. I'm going to short the stock market. I'm going to short oil stocks because they're going down. Then his algorithm starts shorting the market. Then all the people with stop losses, all their stocks go down. Then they start selling, and the market starts to melt down. When the 9/11 happened, the stock market melted down, and they shut the stock market. And the way they could open the stock market was to say, if anybody stands up on a plane and tries to hijack a plane, we're going to have marshals on the plane and we're going to shoot them. The problem is with the UFO thing, the story is, and this is true, they are running the show. The government has no control over what these people. There's a high-level CIA guy by the name of Jim Semivan, who was a briefer for President Bush. He was a high-level briefer for the president, who was asked. He's an experiencer. He had the beings in his room, and he was asked, who's running it? And he said, they are. He even talked about the fact that the president had been abducted. They took the president during a news conference. They shut the entire news conference down, and they took the president and brought the president back. The president said, I was abducted. I was taken. And they did it for one reason, the same as they do when they shut down the nuclear weapons. They've been in and they've shut down nuclear missiles and stuff like that. It's just to say, we're in charge. We're running the show here. So that kind of stuff, you don't want the government out there saying, we don't know what's going on. We have no control. The president is the most powerful guy in the world. You want him, he knows all the answers. He doesn't know the answers to this. This thing is beyond our control.
Which president was abducted?
We don't know. Jim Semivan never stated who it was. We do know, if you've ever interviewed Vaughn Smith, who's big regressionist out of California, she has an event happens at the Coronado Hotel off the coast of California, and Bill Clinton is there, and she is told by inside sources that Bill Clinton and 2 Secret Service agents were abducted. He was at the hotel at the time when all these abductions took place. But I asked her, I said, was there a news conference? And it doesn't appear there's a news conference, so it looks like it's a different story. But it's this idea that we have control, that we can do this kind of stuff. The government for sure, and the aliens are doing the same thing. Like you get this Antarell thing. So Antarell shows up, he lands in the bush, but then he disappears again. It's like the breadcrumb thing. What they're doing, both the government and the aliens, is leaving these breadcrumbs. They're forcing you to think. They're forcing you to try to figure this thing out. They're just making us think. If the aliens wanted to disclose, they would land on the White House lawn. They haven't. And if they wanted to disappear, we know through abduction experiences that nobody ever sees anybody getting abducted. It never happens. You don't see anybody getting abducted. So when they want to be cloaked, when they don't want to be seen, they're not seen, which means when you see a UFO, You're part of the game. They want you to see them. Why do UFOs have lights on them? So you can see them. It's all a part of the game. They want you to see it. They want you to think. They want to raise consciousness. And the government's doing the same thing because the Brookings Institute report said you cannot drop this on people because you're going to have a lot of problems. And then what do? How do you stop it? Once you spill the milk, you still spill the milk. So what they're doing is they're kicking it down the road and they're gradually leaking stories. The one that they're leaking right now is the portal story. They're putting out the idea that there's a portal, that this is not rocket ships flying through space. This is portals going from one point in space to another, and that there's these portals. And the CIA is actually leaking this story right now. They offered me an in on this story, and I said, no, I'd rather be a chess player than a chess piece. So I know they're leaking this kind of stuff, and that's what the whole thing's about. So there is no cover up. But if you do look at why they're playing the secrecy game since 1947, is they're building weapons out of the thing. So if we're the West, we're the good guys, we're the light on the hill. Do you want to give this to Al Qaeda? Do you want to give this to ISIS? Do you want to give it to the Chinese? Do you want to give it to the Russians? We say no. We want to control this technology. Whoever controls this technology controls the world, and we're the good guys. So we have to control the technology. And therefore, if you think that you're going to release it, no, you're not, because you're not going to release the atomic bomb secret. You're not going to release the UFO secret. We need it to build weapons. We need to control it, because if we give it to ISIS and Al Qaeda, especially the consciousness thing, where if you have 1947, you have a live alien that's talking in people's heads, and you recover this live alien at Roswell in 1947, if you're an intelligence guy, you go like, wow, we'd love to have that. We could go to Putin. We could tell Putin, this is God. We're God. We want you to do this. We want you to do that. And that's the kind of stuff that is so critical to the military, who has the money and controls this whole thing, is that there's always military technology, and the spin-offs will come down to us. But I think they're in a situation now where they're leaking this thing because they don't want you back in 1947 in case something happens that they can't control. So they're gradually leaking the fact that there is a control group, there was a live alien, we have UFOs at Area 51, and what they do is they surround it by disinformation so that when the story comes out, everybody says, it's just garbage. And it's always plausible deniability that you can't prove the story, but they're basically telling us a story through Hollywood, through fiction, through bad witnesses, and that kind of stuff, where they're acclimatizing us to the fact that we're not alone.
Well, that's really interesting, Grant, and how you are seeing this, all of this going down. Now, here's a question from Preston D. asking, do you believe Paul Hellyer was being told the truth? And then this disappeared. By the people who were telling him stories about UFOs.
Preston, it must be Preston Dennett. Okay, here's the story. Paul Hellyer told this story in 1967 about the base. So when I confronted him about this, he said, I did not write the speech. I do not know anything about this. I just read the speeches that were written for me. And so that story he got from somebody else. He got one story. When he was the defense minister, and he was actually the deputy prime minister. So he was actually like the vice president of Canada at one point in the 1960s under Trudeau. And so when he was in as the defense minister, he told me that he was doing other things. There was UFO reports coming. He wasn't interested. He didn't care about it, and he didn't know anything. What happened was that there was a book by Philip Corso came out on the Roswell crash, and he had been given a copy of the book, and he was sitting there during the summer. He sits at his cottage and he reads, and he's reading this book about Roswell, and his son-in-law comes to him and he says, what are you reading that garbage for? That's absolute nonsense. And so Paul goes, really? And so he puts the book down, and his son works for a general, a 2-star general. So the son goes and he says, oh, my father-in-law is reading this stupid book, and the general says, well, it's for real. So he goes to Paul and he says, this is for real, and he gives this 2-star U.S. Air Force general's name to Paul Hellyer. Now, Paul Hellyer knows nothing. He has no idea what's going on. So he phones the general, and he said, I'm reading this book by Corso, and I want to know, is this real? And the guy said, it's all real and more. And he basically confirms to Paul Hellyer, this is real. the story's for real. So Paul starts going out, but then Paul makes the mistake of he listens to what everybody says, and he starts repeating all the rumors, all the stories. And so when somebody says there's tall whites, then he repeats something, but he doesn't have this from firsthand experience. So he tells all these stories and gets himself into a lot of trouble repeating stuff that there's no backup for these stories. The story about the general is for real. But then he tells 2 years ago, he tells another bizarre story, because as I said, everybody always asks me, what happens in Canada? And I go, I have no idea what's going on, until Paul Hellyer told a story 2 years ago. So Paul knows nothing except for this 67 thing and the story that the two-star general had told him. Otherwise, he knows nothing. He's just repeating people's stories. So then this is 2 years ago, we're in an event in Brantford, Ontario, and there's reporters asking him questions. And who runs the Canadian government? And he says, well, it might be the Privy Council. And he's sort of guessing. He doesn't, same as me, he doesn't know. And then the question goes around, and it comes back, and then Paul says, I do know somebody who knows what's going on in the Canadian government. He said, I got a phone call from a guy, an Air Force guy, who said to me, there's a guy, he's the head of emergency management, and he's got ALS. He's got Lou Gehrig's disease, and the guy's dying, and he needs to get something off his chest, and he's decided you're the guy he needs to talk to. And Paul says, okay, I'll phone him. Paul doesn't phone him. The Air Force guy phones him back up, and he said, he's about to go off the cliff. You better phone him. And so he phones up this guy with Lou Gehrig's disease, and he says, you want to tell me something? And the guy says, I just want to let you know, this is for real. He said, I was taken to the CIA. I was forced to sign my life away. And they told me what was going on. And this is for real. And I was at Area 51. I was actually in one of the crafts. And this thing's for real. This makes sense because this is emergency management. And this is why I talk about the stock market melting down, the 64 reasons, all the things that can go wrong if suddenly it gets released and you go, oh, I didn't realize this was going to happen. I didn't realize that was going to happen. And the horse is out of the barn and you're trying to put the horse back in the barn again. And emergency management, there is no doubt that the U.S., the Americans, the Canadians, everybody's got a plan. What happens if there happens to be a crash of some emergency management? So the emergency management guy, you got to put money in the banks. You got to stop the run on the stock market. You got to do this, you've got to do that. All these different things that might happen if there's suddenly this story gets out. That's what makes sense. And in the United States, FEMA is the organization. And I was told by one of Stephen Greer's witnesses that FEMA is where it happens, at Mount Weather. This is where they take the president. If there's a nuclear attack, they take him to Mount Weather, Virginia. Underground, this is where the facilities with all, they're interacting with all the embassies around the world, all the military and stuff like that. That's where he said they're running the UFO program. That's FEMA. That's emergency management. So it made sense that when I heard Paul Hellyer tell this story, I said, this makes sense. Emergency management is one of the organizations that has to have a need to know as to what's going on.
Just incredible. Wow. Grant, you're such a wealth of information.
I have no life. This is all I do.
But you do. You have a life here on Supernatural Girls.
Right.
There you go. That's normal. I mean, this has been so informative. I mean, and also, obviously, your book is tremendous. Again, I want to urge everybody to get a copy because it's great.
Oh, it is good.
Yeah.
No question about it.
The name of Grant's latest, Charlie Red Star. It's an endearing book too. I mean, because all the stories that you catalog in here, and I just can't say enough about the wonderful way that this was named, apparently by a poet, Charlie Red Star. It just makes it so much more personal and so much more something of the people rather than owned by a government in Canada or the government in the United States. This is the people's UFO. That's how I think of your book. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. And so thank you so much. And please, you must come back to tell us the rest of these great stories.
Thank you. Will do.
Another book. My gosh. I mean, this is great, great stuff. And next week, everybody, we will have Stan Gordon. We're back to the cryptids, flying humanoids, all of those creatures that go bump in the night. It is spooky October on Supernatural Girls. So we will see you next week. And until then, everybody, we'll see you on the Blue Highway. Good night.
Good night.